Thinking on paper is one of the most enriching activities you can engage in for your mind, for your body, for your spirit. And no, thinking on paper isn't just another way of saying writing. In this video, I'm going to show you a 3-step system I've developed over my years as a peer-reviewed researcher in the field of value theory that will help you create the ultimate level of clarity in your thinking. A level of clarity and sharpness that the majority of people will never achieve. Starting with the first step. Stochastic note-taking. So recently I went to my mom's place and found a box of old books, many of which I read for various research projects I was doing years ago in college. And here's one of those books. All right, so now I'm sure you noticed something right away. Yeah, it's the insane number of sticky notes all throughout the book. And if you look closely, each of these sticky notes doesn't just serve as a bookmark to highlight an important part of the book. Instead, almost every sticky note here has some specific notes written on it containing my thoughts on what I was reading. And it's funny because as I started to reread many of these books, I started to notice something interesting about these notes. Namely that at first glance, these notes are pretty random. At the time, and even to this day, as I engage in this same habit as I read, the pattern is the same. Although I often read some book with a specific research question in mind, I don't stick to that goal rigidly. Instead, I often take notes and write my own feedback, critiques, or syntheses on each sticky note purely based on some feeling. Call it an intuition that this point in the book is somehow important or interesting. It's simply that I'm not sure why yet. And so that's why I call this approach to note-taking stochastic, meaning in some way random or unstructured. But what's the use of doing this? Doesn't this just lead to a mess? The exact opposite of the clarity of thought we're looking to achieve here? No, and here's why. It's useful to imagine each thought we have as a seed. We have no guarantee at all that any one seed is going to bear fruit. However, the more seeds we plant and the more we give them water, sunlight, and nutrients to grow, the more likely it is we will end up with a beautiful garden of fully grown, mature ideas. So many times we're told that when we take some course, read some book, attend some speech or lecture, or watch some podcast or video, we should take highly structured and targeted notes. And for sure, that's true to an extent. If we have a highly structured research goal or topic we want to write or speak on, the notes should have some structure. But there's also a danger in being too structured and too targeted. After all, not all our seeds will grow into beautiful plants. And how do we know which ones will be the ones to grow? My best ideas, my best writing, they've all come from this seemingly messy process of simply feeling out what seems interesting and writing my thoughts about it on a sticky note, whether it seems relevant or not. But how? How do we channel this messiness into clarity? Well, that's where the second step in this process comes in. Translation into narrative form. So I used to be a bit crazy with my note-taking while reading. After I would read a book, I would open a Word document, take every single sticky note, and one by one write my note into the document, along with the page number and often the exact quote from the book that the sticky note was attached to. As you can imagine, this process would take hours, but it also taught me a lot. As I looked back through my notes, I would start to notice some patterns in the types of topics I was taking notes on, what I was naturally drawn to, and I would also start to notice overlaps between certain notes I had taken from this current book and other notes I had taken from other books. And that's when I would start to write additional notes underneath those notes. Observations such as, this author seems to agree with this other author on this point, or this author's evidence and this other author's evidence seem to imply different conclusions, and so on. It was at this point that the best seeds among those I had planted were starting to grow roots. You see, at the time, I was initially writing down my thoughts on those sticky notes. I couldn't have anticipated which ideas or thoughts would be the best ones. It was only after I laid them all out and compared them to other notes that I started to see a narrative forming. And when a narrative starts to form, that's when those roots begin to form. That's, in other words, when the messiness and chaos begin to shift into clarity. You see, our brains are primed for narratives. We remember best through the formation of narratives. There are so many apps out there that supposedly help you build a second brain and store information for you, and don't get me wrong, I use them to some extent. For instance, as I've said in other videos, I use the app Notion simply to store and categorize studies I've read that I think are interesting. And maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but you should not be leaning too heavily on these apps or relying on them primarily. And why? Precisely because if your goal is remembering and retaining information, then building new narratives, not simply reviewing information or even mind maps, is the most effective method. And it's why the oral tradition of passing down generational knowledge has been practiced for millennia. For instance, let's imagine you're trying to organize your thoughts on philosophical inquiry into the nature of truth and meaning. Well, maybe you've read about John Searle's cluster theory, Alfred Tarski's semantic theory of truth, Saul Kripke's causal chain theory, Edmund Husserl's phenomenology, Gareth Evans' theory of proper names, and Gottlieb Frege's theory of sense and reference. Okay, so this seems like a mishmash of information that would be hard to remember, let alone organize into something coherent, right? But here's what a very simple narrative might look like. Evans built upon the work of Searle and Kripke and created a theory that synthesized cluster theory and causal reference. All three of them were inspired by the initial sense and reference distinctions Frege laid out, while Husserl went in a completely different direction and investigated the mental contents of reference that Frege laid out. But there was a great potential loss here, as because Husserl and these other philosophers were from different schools of thought, they were never able to build on each other's work. Alright, so although this sounds complex, do you see how building this kind of narrative helps someone who is studying this topic to remember all of the key points, distinctions, and arguments of each thinker? The thing is, though, these ideas haven't yet actually borne fruit. There's still no truly original idea of your own here yet, and so the ideas are still simply growing their roots. And that's precisely why we need to proceed to our next step on this list: free writing and argumentation. By this point in your thought process, your brain is processing quite a lot of information, and the natural result of this is that you'll start to have all sorts of insights and ideas. You'll be sitting there, relaxing, out for a walk, or about to go to sleep, and bam, some new idea will randomly come to you. That's precisely when you want to free write. I personally have time set aside in my calendar each morning to write my thoughts in my journal, and journaling is a really great way to get a lot of these thoughts out. But if I'm being honest, most of these random ideas that come to me don't come to me when I expect them to, or when I've scheduled them in my journal to write about them. I mean, can't you relate to that? That's why a lot of people like carrying around a pocket notebook with them everywhere they go, and that's a really great way to catch these ideas fast before they fade. But I also just have a Google Doc that serves as my journal, and whenever I'm out and an idea comes to me, I can easily pull out my phone and write that idea down in my journal. While digital or physical journaling is a really great way to capture these ideas, here's one caveat you need to be aware of. You need to be non-judgmental to yourself when you enter ideas into your journal. What do I mean by this? Well, it's funny. Even though a journal is supposed to be this private space where you can write anything you want, I have often in the past realized I was sometimes censoring myself or not wanting to write an idea down because it sounded too crazy, too fringe, had no evidence or no logical argument to support it, or it was in some other way inaccurate. Are you doing this to yourself sometimes too? Well, the problem with it is that if we don't allow ourselves complete and ultimate freedom of thought when we write down our ideas, we might end up sabotaging the growth of one of our best seeds. You see, just as we can't know how a plant will grow until it starts to peek through the soil and into the open air, we also can't simply prejudge some idea we have, even if it's simply some unfounded intuition or suspicion. The reality is we don't know what that idea is going to turn into. Sure, it could be a crappy idea at the end of the day. A lot of our ideas will end up that way, but it could also turn into a world-changing idea. An idea that is truly impactful and innovative. Free writing isn't enough to bring our ideas to full maturity, though. You see, now that we have so much great raw material from our notes as well as from our free writing and mini narratives, we should now be able to look back and sift through all of our ideas to begin to create grand, overarching narratives. And these narratives will take the form of weekly essays. Now, writing weekly essays to argue for some specific viewpoint or to present your ideas seems a bit daunting, I get it. You might feel like you're not a good writer or your ideas aren't good enough. But you see, that's the point. If you're not good enough yet, you need to practice doing it until you are good at it. The truth is, you'll never be satisfied with your ideas. You'll always see flaws in them. You'll always see problems. You'll always realize you could deliver them more clearly and so on. And if you are satisfied, then honestly, it's a great sign your ideas still aren't good enough yet. I still write something every single week, and there's no reason you can't do the same. Have you ever noticed that the best speakers, commentators, and idea innovators out there seem so flawless in their thinking, so polished, so prepared with facts and figures? It's because they're constantly performing at least some version of the 3 steps I've laid out here. And over time, if you practice them, you'll achieve the same results. If you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact, not only on your own life, but on the lives of countless others, then be sure to watch this next video.